I flew on the world's only skydiving DC-9. The Douglas DC-9 was one of the first short-haul jet airliners developed in the US, flying for the first time in 1965. It opened up jet service to countless smaller cities that would not have otherwise been served by the four-engine jetliners of the time. It's also the first of several generations of McDonnell Douglas narrow-body airliners, and was later developed into the even more popular MD-80, and then into the MD-90, and finally the Boeing 717. Now, anyone who's watched these videos for a while knows that I'm a big fan of the DC-9 family. I once went all the way to Bulgaria to fly on the last MD-80s in Europe, not to mention a couple 717s in Hawaii the same year. In total, 976 of the original DC-9s were built, from 1965 until 1982, and as with any type built around those years, there are not that many left flying these days. Most active ones are flying cargo in Mexico, and supposedly there are a few in Africa still flying passengers. One of the more notable ones still kicking around, though, is in Southern California, in the city of Perris. Perris Valley Airport, located roughly between Los Angeles and Palm Springs, is a privately owned airport with a 5,100-foot runway. It's home to Skydive Perris, one of the largest skydiving drop zones in the country, and has been a family-run operation since 1976. They operate a fairly large skydiving fleet of 3 Twin Otters and 5 short Skyvans. However, the airport is also home to November 127 November Kilo, a 1969-built McDonnell Douglas DC-9-21. This 57-year-old plane is full of history and was first delivered to Scandinavian Airlines in May 1969. It's one of only 10 DC-9-20s built, essentially combining the shorter fuselage of the DC-9-10 with the more powerful engines and larger wing of the DC-9-30 to meet SAS's need for better short-field performance. It bounced around Scandinavia until 1995, when it made its way over to the States, and briefly flew with Spirit Airlines, ValueJet, and eventually Allegiant Air in 1998. Allegiant retired it in 2002, and needing engine overhauls, it was destined to be scrapped. That's where Diane and Benny Knatzer, the founders of Skydive Perris, came in, seeing an opportunity to offer an entirely unique skydiving experience. After a year in storage in Victorville, the plane was flown out with 2 new engines over to Perris, where some modifications would need to be made. First and foremost, most members of the DC-9 family were designed with air stairs in the tail to make boarding and deplaning easier. In this plane's case, they were, removed completely to create an unobstructed skydiving exit. With that, plus some structural changes, they received approval from the FAA, and the plane flew its first skydivers in 2006. The DC-9 was then put into storage again in 2013, and after years of work, returned to the air a decade later in 2024. This makes it the only airworthy example of a DC-9-20 in the world, which is already rare enough. Now, almost immediately after it flew again, the question became, will they let people ride along on this without jumping? Unfortunately for the poor social media admin of the Skydive Perris page, that was a very frequent question they got, and the answer was pretty conclusive. Despite ride-alongs not being a thing, the DC-9 flies a couple times a year on specific days, and usually with more than enough notice to plan a trip down there. The other thing about the airport you may have noticed is that the runway is only 50 feet wide. That's not to mention the fence line is not that far from said runway, meaning just watching it fly would be an experience in itself. So, a few months ago, some good friends and I made the trip down to California to do exactly that, and see and hear it we did. Okay, I've never quite felt the ground shake like that while filming an airliner taking off. It honestly sounded more like a fighter jet in that moment than anything else. Now, on the day that we were there, the plane was supposed to fly 2, potentially 3 times, so there was plenty of opportunity to get a couple different angles. They climb up to 15,000 feet in just 5 minutes or so, drop up to 80 skydivers over the course of a few passes, and are then back on the ground in 20 minutes. Aside from the obvious part of having the air stair door in the first place, this is also where the extra performance of the DC-920 really helps, because flying a jet for skydiving is not cheap. Skydive Perris even admits that they operate it more for love than money, which I have huge respect for. All the more reason to come down here to see it fly now. Once the last of the skydivers are away, the DC-9 heads back down very quickly, with vertical speeds between 4,000 and 8,000 feet per minute, and still ends up beating the last of the skydivers back to the ground. So, after that spectacular display of a DC-9 doing things no normal airliner ever does, we asked around to see if we could get a closer look at it before the next flight. Because the east side of the runway is technically where the drop zone is, we signed a couple waivers and got a ride over to the plane to go check it out. That was pretty much the perfect opportunity to grab some close-up photos and get a good look inside, especially at the data plate and of course the flight deck too. Like I mentioned at the start, this plane is now 57 years old, and like any jet built in 1969, keeping it functional in this day and age is no small feat. In just the flight deck alone, there's so many little details here, like the old DC-9 turquoise color, and a maintenance manual from the original Eastern Airlines. Meanwhile, behind that, the cabin is not too different from its airline days, with a total of 80 seats. There were 2 rows of business class style recliner seats in a 2-2 layout. Behind another bulkhead are 15 rows of economy class style seats in the DC-9 family's typical 2-3 configuration. Those narrow to a 2-2 layout in the last 3 rows next to the engines. And of course, out the back is what makes all of this possible, the air stair door with a lack of air stairs. The actual door from the cabin stays closed in flight when they're not jumping, but the view as you stand here about to jump must be insane. Now, while we were here at the plane, we also met Benny himself, who, along with his wife Diane, bought the airport back in 1976. Fast forward 50 years later, and their son and daughter have now taken over the day-to-day operation, but Benny and Diane remain co-owners. We mentioned we came here just to see the DC-9 fly, and Benny very kindly showed us around some of his own personal projects, and we had a great chat. One thing led to another, and basically since the next flight wasn't going to have a completely full load of skydivers, he invited us along for the ride. I will make one thing clear. We figured going in that riding on the plane wasn't on the table, so we didn't even ask. We were just happy to get a close-up look at a rare working piece of history like this. So, after profusely thanking Benny for the opportunity, we headed back over to the main office to sign even more waivers, and somehow found ourselves amongst a big group of skydivers waiting for their briefing.
The other thing you want to do is you want to walk around and look at that door in the back. When you're looking up in the back, get an idea of what that looks like, because the next time you see it, you're going to have about a millisecond before you're running down it and diving out the door. You can also notice when you're looking at it from the back, you'll see a bunch of black streaks on the roof. Those are GoPro marks. Don't put another one there. This plane's older than most of you. It's, if we bust the ceiling or break an overhead bin and can't fly because something ridiculous like that, the problem isn't the parts are expensive. The problem is you can't get them. So just be gentle, right? Trust us. The tray tables work. The overhead bins work. The call lights work, all right? You don't need to check that out for yourself.
After the briefing, we also met Diane and the flight attendants, who told us they'd let us board first to grab the exact seats that we wanted. That was so nice of them, especially considering we were just last-minute guests at this point. With all of that done though, we went back across the runway to board the DC-9 again, but this time for real. We picked the last 3 rows just before the engines, and I grabbed seat 18A. Back here is easily the best possible place to sit on any member of the DC-9 family, and this seat was no exception, with this perfect view of the wing and the JT-8D right next to me. The back door was open for the moment for some airflow in the California heat as everybody piled in. Looking around though, this was genuinely surreal. Flying on classic airliners like this is exactly what I live for, and the fact that we were joining on this for a whole flight was even better. So, from quite possibly the best seat in the back, here's us starting up and taking off from Perris Valley Airport's runway 33.
Good morning, and welcome aboard Perris Air, flight number 2 with non-stop service to 13,000 feet. Your seatbelt fastened for the remainder of the flight. For those in the aisle seats, once unbuckled, place the strap behind you to ensure that the aisle is clear. We don't want to trip seatbelts. Helmets must be secure for takeoff. Let's go on.
What an awesome takeoff that was, especially sitting next to those 2 JT-8Ds, which was really not something I ever thought I'd get to experience again. Like I mentioned, it only takes a few minutes for us to get up to 15,000 feet. Despite this, the flight attendants still handed out these mints to everybody, even the people who would be departing the airplane very shortly. Just for a bit of context on the airspace here, Perris Valley Airport sits just south of March Air Reserve Base and right in the approach path, hence the immediate left turn after takeoff. That's not to mention all the other controlled airspace higher up, so flying a DC-9 VFR in the middle of all of that takes some coordination. In what felt like no time at all, the first of 3 groups of skydivers got their signal to stand up and get ready to jump, as one of the crew opened up the back door. And other totally normal sentences for me to say while sitting in an airline seat. Right after that first group went, we turned back to the east to set up another east-to-west pass over the airport for the second group. I do have to say, it's quite an experience not only watching a bunch of people run down the aisle of a commercial airliner and out of it, but also riding in an airliner that's being hand-flown and doing these sorts of turns at these speeds. With plenty of rudder deflections, you could feel all of it, and it was a fun ride. Plus, we had some beautiful views over this part of Southern California, and although we really didn't have very long up here, I had to remind myself to just savor the moment. Meanwhile, back inside, it's worth mentioning that these seats are all still entirely normal airliner seats. There's a tray table and a seat back pocket, which had the safety card on a sheet of printer paper, as well as a second page with actual detailed instructions for the jumpers. Shortly, it was time for the third and final group of skydivers to make their exit, after which we would also be back on the ground very quickly. Well, that was a day that's gonna be hard to beat. What an absolute honor it was to ride along on a piece of history like this, especially knowing how rare passenger DC-9s are. Not only was that super fun, just being there, having a great time with people and watching them jump out, but it was on board a genuine piece of history. And that's something I really want to make clear. To me, it's not just oh cool, we got to ride on an old plane. It's that, through purely being in the right place at the right time, and the generosity of strangers, that we got an unforgettable flight on a nearly extinct airplane type. There are probably people watching this who would give a kidney to do the same thing. So in case I haven't said it enough, an enormous thank you to everyone at Skydive Perris for letting us take part in this. It's such a cool family-run operation, and us three Canadians were very happy we made the trip. Thank you for watching this rare flight on an even rarer DC-9, and I will see you next time.